Birth of a fortress, the Norman dream, carried more than cold. It fear of conquest and fear of the man whose presence now loomed over England that had to be controlled, not merely admired. And to control it, he needed more than soldiers. Tower of London. London, after the Battle of Hastings, city simmering with bowed, but they had not broken. Their loyalty was fresh. Every church whispered men. He understood power, and he understood that fear looked toward the riverbank, high ground, imagined a monument that would eclipse every structure in England. The moment he told them his plan, he said, "Make it tall enough so that all of London remembers who its king truly is." His voice, steady and cold, echoed through the wooden hall. The men around him bowed, plotted in secret. Common folk murmured about rebellion, and northern lords in taverns and churches. Kings rested beneath the stones of Westminster. Their laws shaped its markets and guilds. Now, suddenly, it belonged to a foreign conqueror who spoke a different language, followed different customs, and punished resistance with brutal force. To the Saxons, William was a tyrant. To the Normans, he was destiny. William knew he didn't have the luxury of patience. If he hesitated, the fragile peace would collapse and his hard-won crown would slip from his head. So he chose a weapon that required no soldiers, horses, or noble titles. He needed a symbol, a fortress. A fortress cannot be bribed. A fortress cannot be intimidated. A fortress cannot betray its master. And once the tower was built, it would remind every villager, merchant, and noble that the Normans were here to stay. Building the tower. The work began in 1070. William summoned masons, craftsmen, and stonecutters from Normandy, men who owed their fortunes to him, men whose loyalty could be trusted. The Saxons watched bitterly as the first stones were laid, realizing their city was being reshaped by foreign hands. The white cane stones, transported from across the channel, gleamed in the sunlight like bone. As the walls grew higher, Londoners whispered that the fortress looked like the crown of some ancient giant rising from the riverbank. Every day, the sound of hammers and chisels rang out across the Thames. The work was slow, dangerous, and expensive. Hundreds of laborers toiled from dawn till dusk, their sweat mixing with dust and river mud. Some fell from scaffolding and died instantly. Others were crushed beneath stones. The tower demanded sacrifices long before its dungeons filled. But William never faltered. Every brick laid was a promise that no rebellion could topple. In time, the structure began to dominate the skyline. Its massive walls cast shadows over the wooden houses below, and its height dwarfed every church in England. From the river, sailors could see it glinting like a pale sentinel guarding the heart of England. A Norman dream rising from Saxon soil. A fortress of fear. As the tower grew, so did its reputation. Londoners avoided walking near it at night, convinced that spirits haunted the construction site. They whispered that the land itself rejected the fortress, that ancient forces were angered by its rise. But the truth was more human. William ordered that prisoners, rebellious Saxons, thieves, and men accused of treason be held within the incomplete walls. Their screams echoed through the night, carried by the wind into the city. Some said they heard chains dragging. Others claimed they saw figures moving in the windows where no floors yet existed. Within months, the tower was no longer just a building. It was a symbol of terror. And William intended it that way. When local nobles refused to accept Norman rule, William invited them to London. They arrived hopeful, but when they approached the river and saw the towering stone structure, their courage faltered. Meetings held inside the tower were tense. The building spoke before William did. A man sitting in the shadow of such walls does not easily refuse a king. The politics of stone. The tower was not merely a fortress, it was a political weapon. For William, it solved three problems at once. It intimidated the Saxons. Seeing the fortress every day reminded them that resistance was useless.
Visitors who stand beneath its walls today still feel the same thing the Saxons felt: awe, fear, and the unmistakable weight of power. The Tower of London began not as a prison, not as a palace, not as a landmark, but as a dream. A Norman dream, a conqueror's dream, a dream so powerful that it reshaped a nation. Shadows of the crown, betrayal, intrigue, and royal power plays. The Tower of London stood like a stone giant on the edge of the Thames, silent, immovable, and always watching. But inside its thick walls, power trembled like a candle in the wind. Kings rose and fell here, nobles gambled their lives in secret chambers, and beneath every royal order echoed another voice, the whisper of betrayal. No place in England saw more ambition, more fear, or more blood than the Tower. It was not simply a fortress, it was a battleground for the crown itself. The prisoners who were once kings. Long before the Tower gained its monstrous reputation, it became the stage for one of England's most brutal truths. No crown was ever secure. The first king to taste this reality was Henry VI. Weak, gentle, and swallowed by the chaos of the Wars of the Roses, Henry was dragged to the Tower after losing his throne to the powerful Edward IV. His arrival was not triumphant, nor was it dignified. The guards did not bow. The doors did not open in ceremony. They slammed shut. Henry spent months pacing the cold stone floors, praying for peace in a world that had no mercy for fragile kings. Outside, the war raged on. Inside, he faded. Until the night he was found lifeless, slumped beside the altar in the Wakefield Tower. The official story said he died of grief. The truth whispered through England said he was murdered. A king killed where kings were kept. The Tower had shown its purpose, to protect power by destroying those who threatened it. A queen in chains. But not only kings suffered. Anne Boleyn, the radiant second wife of Henry VIII, once walked the Tower as a queen. She arrived through the Traitor's Gate not in triumph, but in terror. Only 3 years earlier, she had danced in the royal court, her laughter echoing through palaces. Now accused of treason, adultery, and witchcraft, she watched the sky through iron bars. The Tower had a cruel sense of irony. Anne had been crowned queen inside its walls. Now she awaited her execution on the same ground. Henry VIII had once sworn he would love her forever. But in England, forever often meant until politics required otherwise. As Anne awaited her fate, she asked her ladies a haunting question. Will the king even weep for me? The women said nothing. When the French executioner arrived, she knelt bravely. Her last prayer was quiet. Her last breath was quick. And with the fall of one sharp blade, the Tower fed its hunger once more, not for blood, but for power. Because a king who kills a queen proves himself untouchable. Brothers in chains, the tragedy of the princes. No story cast a darker shadow than the fate of the 2 young princes, Edward V and his brother Richard, the Duke of York. They entered the Tower as heirs to the throne. They never left. Their uncle, Richard, the Duke of Gloucester, was sworn to protect them. Instead, he locked them away in the royal apartments while he maneuvered to take the crown for himself. Londoners watched with suspicion as the boys appeared less frequently at the windows. Then they disappeared entirely. Years later, bones were found buried beneath the staircase. The truth was never confirmed, but the world made up its mind long ago. The Tower had swallowed the heirs of England. The princes became ghosts of the fortress, symbols of innocence caught in the jaws of ambition. Their disappearance reminded all of Europe that even children were not safe from the hunger for power. The noble who played too many games. Some men entered the Tower not because they were weak, but because they were dangerous. None fit this description better than Thomas More. More was a scholar, a statesman, and one of the most brilliant minds of his time. But he defied Henry VIII when the king demanded loyalty to his new church. More refused, standing firm in his belief that no mortal king could claim authority over heaven. Henry disagreed. More was imprisoned in the Tower, where he spent months writing letters, witty, thoughtful, and calm, as though he were preparing for a dinner party rather than death. When the day arrived, he walked to the scaffold with a smile. "I die the king's good servant, but God's first," he said. The crowd fell silent. The Tower had claimed queens, princes, soldiers, rebels, but no death haunted England's conscience like the execution of Thomas More. Because he did not die for ambition, he died for principle. And principles were the one thing kings feared most. Intrigue behind every door. Every chamber of the Tower had a story. Every shadow hid a secret. There was the dark cell known as Little Ease, where prisoners could neither stand, nor sit, nor lie down. Those who entered often left broken, or not at all. There was the Queen's house, where Catherine Howard, another wife of Henry VIII, cried through the night before her death. She was only a teenager, yet the Tower treated her no differently than hardened traitors. There were the rooms where nobles plotted rebellions, where spies exchanged coded messages, where guards whispered warnings to prisoners who might not see the morning sun. And above it all stood the White Tower, cold, unmoving, eternal, watching each tragedy unfold with monstrous patience. The Tower did not kill. It did not punish. It simply waited. And every king, queen, and noble who stepped inside wrote another line in its grim history. The Game of Crowns. The Tower was more than a prison. It was the kingdom's chessboard. Kings moved bishops. Queens moved knights. Nobles played pawns, hoping they would not be sacrificed. Every betrayal was a strategy. Every execution a message. During the Tudor era, the Tower became the center of England's political climate. Ambition was the only currency. Loyalty was conditional. Friendships were fragile as glass. A noble could dine with the king one night and sleep in the Tower the next. Every accusation could become a death sentence. Every whisper could turn into a warrant. And every rising sun could bring a new betrayal. And yet people continued to play, because winning the crown meant winning everything. When monarchs became prisoners, the Tower was not made of stone alone. It was built from betrayal, shaped by intrigue, and crowned with the blood of those who dared to challenge the throne.
Chronicles, torture, trials, and the making of myths. The Tower of London was never just stone, never just walls, gates, and iron bars. It was a living creature, one that fed on fear. The river mist that curled around its battlements seemed almost alive. At night, when the wind rattled against its towers, Londoners whispered that the fortress was breathing. Generations knew one truth. Once you entered the tower as a prisoner, you left only as a corpse or a legend. This is the story of the screams that echoed within its walls, the trials that shaped nations, and the ghosts that history refused to silence. The tools of terror. Long before the tower became a tourist attraction, it was a house of agony. Its chambers were not simply cold, they were calculated. Every brick echoed the intent of kings who understood that pain could serve as a tool, a weapon, even a political strategy. The most feared room of all was the Lower Wakefield Tower, where the infamous instruments of torture rested like sleeping beasts. The rack. A massive frame of wood and rollers designed to tear a body apart slowly. Victims were tied by wrists and ankles. With each turn of the wheel, joints strained, ligaments ripped, and bones cracked. The screams from this device were so horrifying that even jailers refused to enter the chamber alone. One of its most famous victims was Guy Fawkes, the man behind the gunpowder plot. When dragged into the torture chamber, he was strong, defiant, even proud. Days later, he was broken, his signature on the confession barely recognizable. He left the tower alive, but only just. The scavenger's daughter. A twisted iron device that crushed the body inward, knees to chest, chest to thighs, forcing blood to pour from the nose and ears. Victims often lost consciousness within minutes. The manacles. Prisoners were suspended by their wrists for hours or days, shoulders dislocating under their own weight. Some died from shock, others begged for death. Inside these chambers, the tower spoke one language: pain. And those who survived carried its mark for the rest of their lives. The trials that decided kingdoms. The tower was not simply a torture house, it was the stage where England's most dramatic trials unfolded. Justice inside its walls was rarely fair, it was political theater dressed as law. The trial of Thomas Cromwell. Once the most powerful man in England, Cromwell had helped Henry VIII reshape the kingdom. But kings feared the powerful, and when Henry turned against him, Cromwell found himself stripped of titles, dragged to the tower, and accused of treason. Witnesses testified against him with trembling voices. Some were forced, others acted to protect themselves. Cromwell stood calm as the verdict, already decided, declared him guilty. He was executed outside the tower, the crowd watching the fall of a man who once controlled the fate of nations. The Lady Jane Grey tragedy. A young girl, just 16, who became queen for 9 days and paid with her life. Jane never sought the crown. She never plotted. She was a pawn in a game of kings and ambitious families. When Mary I reclaimed the throne, Jane was brought to the tower, trembling and confused. Her trial lasted minutes. Her fate lasted centuries. The people of England never forgot the image of the blindfolded child reaching for the execution block with shaking hands. The tower gained another ghost that day. The mystery of the princes in the tower. Among all the tower's tales, none grips the imagination more tightly than the disappearance of the two princes, Edward V and Richard, Duke of York. The year was 1483. After the death of their father, Edward IV, the young princes were brought to the tower for protection while awaiting Edward's coronation. Their uncle, Richard, the Duke of Gloucester, assured the kingdom he would guard them. Instead, he declared himself king. At first, the boys played in the gardens and waved at onlookers from balconies. Then, slowly, they appeared less and less. Their last sighting came in the summer, 2 pale faces peering through a window. After that, they vanished. Rumors spread like wildfire. Some said he had them smothered in their sleep. Others claimed they were starved. A few insisted they escaped and lived as nameless fugitives. Years later, bones were discovered beneath a staircase. Though believed to be the prince's, the truth remains uncertain even today. The ghosts of the young heirs linger in every corner of the tower. Visitors swear they hear footsteps outside their rooms or faint whispers when the halls are dark. The story of the princes is not just history. It is the tower's most enduring myth. Executions that echoed through time. The tower was the silent witness to many deaths. Some were swift, others were crafted to send a message. Anne Boleyn, Queen, mother of Elizabeth I, accused of treason, adultery, and incest, all charges designed to remove her from Henry VIII's path. Anne walked to the scaffold with grace, her head held high. She prayed softly, forgave her enemies, and placed her neck upon the block. The French swordsman struck once, clean, quick, merciful. Then the silence afterwards was heavier than her death. Sir Walter Raleigh, explorer, poet, spy. He spent years imprisoned in the tower, writing stories and poems that would shape English literature. When he was finally executed, his final words were calm. It is a sharp medicine, but it is a physician for all diseases. Lady Elizabeth's terror. Before she became Queen Elizabeth I, she was interrogated within the tower's walls. She heard screams from the torture rooms. She prayed in crypt-like chambers, and she never forgot how close she came to dying. This memory shaped her entire reign. The tower taught her fear, but it also taught her strength. The myths that refuse to die. Where there is suffering, there are spirits, and the tower's legends are as famous as its history. Anne Boleyn's ghost. Many claim to see her walking the grounds, her head tucked under her arm, searching for the justice she never received. Others say she appears in the Chapel Royal, kneeling silently where she was buried without ceremony. The ghost of the White Lady. Guards report seeing a woman dressed in white, her face obscured by mist. She wanders the corridors near the White Tower, sometimes leaving the scent of cheap perfume, sometimes nothing at all. The screams of Guy Fawkes. On cold nights, some say they hear tortured cries echoing through the stone chambers where he was broken. The ravens. Legend warns, if the ravens ever leave the tower, the kingdom will fall. Superstition? Perhaps. But to this day, ravens are kept and cared for as royal guardians. The mysterious shadows. Tourists and guards alike claim to see flickering shadows in empty rooms or figures standing by windows that have been sealed for centuries. The tower does not forget, it does not forgive, and it does not release the stories trapped within its bones. A prison of horrors and a monument of truth. Throughout the centuries, the Tower of London became a monument not just of stone, but of human cruelty and political power. Every scream, every drop of blood, every whispered rumor added another layer to its history. Kings used it to break enemies. Queens died within its walls. Children vanished into its darkness. Nobles learned the price of ambition. Prisoners learned the meaning of fear. The tower was a mirror of England's soul, dark, violent, and endless complex. And yet its legends endure, not because they are gruesome, but because they are human. Fear, betrayal, torture, injustice, ambition. These are the ingredients from which myths are born. The tower simply provided the stage.
Of rebellion, the tower under siege. The Tower of London has always been more than stone walls and iron gates. It has been a survivor. Tested, battered, burned, and bloodied, yet unyielding. For nearly 1,000 years, this fortress has stood at the crossroads of rebellion and power, often finding itself the last line of defense between order and chaos. When England trembled, the tower trembled with it.
and when the nation burned in rebellion, the tower became both shield and target. This chapter follows the tower through its most perilous hours. Moments when mobs roared at its gates, when flames crawled across the city, when armies marched with treason in their hearts, and when the monarchy itself seemed a breath away from collapse. The First Siege, a city divided. The earliest known assault on the tower came in 1191, during the reign of Richard the Lionheart. While the king fought in the Crusades, his younger brother Prince John sought the throne. Power shifted like sand beneath England's feet, and in the chaos, the tower became a symbol of loyalty to a king thousands of miles away. The city erupted with tension as rival factions clashed. The Archbishop of Rouen, William Longchamp, had control of the tower and claimed to rule in Richard's absence, but the nobles despised him. John's supporters surrounded the tower, demanding Longchamp's surrender. Inside the fortress, Longchamp barricaded the gates, posted crossbowmen on the battlements, and prepared for a fight. For days, the siege dragged on, with shouts echoing across the Thames. But Longchamp knew his wound that lingered for generations. How had the impregnable fortress fallen to farmers armed with pitchforks? It was a question England would ask again and again. Flames over London, the tower during the Great Fire. In 1666, fire became the greatest threat the tower had ever faced. The Great Fire of London devoured the city with terrifying speed, turning churches, homes, and marketplaces into rivers of flame. The wind carried sparks eastward toward the tower, where gunpowder and munitions were stored. If the fire reached the fortress, the explosion could destroy half of London. As smoke billowed over the river, soldiers scrambled to protect the powder stores. Buckets of water were hauled up the White Tower steps. Volunteers formed desperate chains, dousing flames before they could take hold. King Charles II himself commanded fire breaks to be created around the eastern walls. One spark, just one spark, could have turned the tower into a crater. Miraculously, the fire stopped short of the gates. The fortress survived, but the near disaster revealed a new truth. Even without enemies, the tower lived under constant threat. The Yorkists strike. The tower in the Wars of the Roses. During the 15th century, England was shaken by the Wars of the Roses. Two rival dynasties, the Yorks and the Lancasters, locked in a brutal struggle for the crown. The tower played a central role, changing hands like a pawn on a blood-soaked chessboard. One of the most dramatic sieges occurred in 1460. Queen Margaret, fighting for the Lancaster cause, commanded that the tower be defended at all costs. The Yorkist army marched on London, seeking both the capital and the fortress that guarded it. As Londoners opened their gates to the Yorkists, the tower found itself isolated. Cannon fire hammered the walls for days. Smoke choked the air. The garrison fought desperately, but morale collapsed as citizens cheered for the Yorks outside. When the defenders finally surrendered, the tower fell once again not by force, but by the shifting loyalties of the people. Ironically, the great fortress built to protect the monarchy became the very place where monarchs were taken prisoner. Kings were crowned here and dethroned here. The most famous siege, the Spanish threat of 1554. Under Mary I, England faced one of its greatest internal threats, the Wyatt Rebellion. Led by Sir Thomas Wyatt, thousands rose against Mary's plan to marry Philip of Spain. Rumors swirled that England would become a puppet of the Spanish Empire, and London erupted in panic. As rebellion spread, Mary retreated to the tower for protection. Standing on the fortress walls, she delivered a defiant speech to her people. "I am your queen, and I choose to live or die among you." It was a turning point. Wyatt's army marched toward the city, capturing bridges and fortifications. For a moment, the rebels seemed unstoppable. But when they reached the tower's gates,
the Queen's bravery had already swayed public opinion. Londoners blocked the rebel advance, forcing Wyatt to retreat. The Tower had once again stood as the last refuge of the monarchy, but also as the symbol of a kingdom in crisis. Gunpowder and treason. The Tower after the plot. The gunpowder plot of 1605 did not target the Tower directly, but its aftermath transformed the fortress into the epicenter of national fear. The conspirators, Guy Fawkes among them, were dragged to the Tower after being captured beneath Parliament with 36 barrels of gunpowder. London panicked, fearing more plots, more conspiracies, more hidden fires ready to spark. The Tower braced for chaos. Defenses were strengthened, guards quadrupled, cannons loaded. The city was locked down. Interrogations echoed through the cold stone chambers. Rumors spread that foreign invaders might attempt a rescue. For months, the Tower existed in a state of siege, even without an army at its
But the tower remained, silent, steadfast, unbroken. From fear to legacy, the tower in the modern world. For nearly 1,000 years, the Tower of London was a place people feared. Its name whispered terror across medieval England. Dark cells, echoing screams, and the weight of royal authority pressing down like stone. But time changes even the darkest of places. What was once a fortress of dread slowly transformed into a symbol of legacy, memory, and national pride. This chapter traces that transformation, from a site of power and punishment to one of preservation and wonder, where the past breathes through ancient walls and history becomes a living story shared with the world. A fortress without enemies. By the late 18th and early 19th centuries, the tower's military importance began to fade. Cannons still lined its walls, soldiers still guarded its gates, but Europe's wars were fought far from London's heart. The tower, once an unbreakable shield, no longer stood against rebellion or foreign invasion. Instead, it stood against time. The fortress gradually assumed new roles. Parts of it became barracks, storehouses, and offices. Tourists, curious, cautious, yet fascinated, started to arrive. They asked questions not about strategy or warfare, but about kings, queens, ghosts, and legends. The transformation had begun. The end of an era, the last prisoners. Though its fearsome reputation lingered, the tower's final prisoners showed how far it had drifted from its violent past. During World War I, German spies were held and executed here, echoing old traditions. In World War II, Rudolf Hess, Hitler's deputy, was briefly imprisoned within the tower walls. But these were exceptions. The fortress that once chained monarchs, traitors, generals, and rebels had become a place where history was reenacted, not made. In 1952, the tower welcomed its last ever inmate, a man jailed for desertion who spent only a few days behind the ancient bars. When he left, a 1,000-year story of imprisonment quietly came to an end. The tower was no longer a prison. It had become something else entirely. Birth of a museum, preserving the past. The transformation into a museum was not sudden. It unfolded over generations. By the Victorian era, fascination with medieval life and royal history swept across Britain. People wanted to see the places where legends were born. The tower answered that call. Ancient armors were polished and displayed. Weapons from centuries of warfare were arranged like a museum of human conflict. Swords of Norman knights, longbows of medieval archers, muskets, cannons, and the great siege machines that once protected the city. The White Tower became home to the royal armories, showcasing the towering armor of King Henry VIII, ornate weapons gifted by emperors and sultans, relics that told the story of England's rise. Visitors arrived from across the globe, no longer trembling at the gates, but walking eagerly through them. The tower was no longer feared, it was admired. Protectors of tradition, the yeoman warders. No symbol of the modern tower is more celebrated than the yeoman warders, popularly known as the beefeaters. Once elite royal guards, their role evolved over time. They became guardians of history, storytellers, protectors of tradition, and the living face of the tower. Clad in crimson and gold Tudor uniforms, they lead visitors through the courtyards and corridors, recounting tales of imprisonment, betrayal, and survival. Their voices echo in the same spaces where kings once issued orders and rebels once met their fate. Each warder is required to have served with distinction in the British Armed Forces. Their presence, disciplined, proud, and steeped in ritual, connects the modern visitor with a lineage stretching back centuries. When they walk the battlements at dusk, and perform the ancient ceremony of the keys, the past comes alive. The ritual has taken place every night without fail for over 700 years. Some traditions never die, they simply change their meaning. The crown jewels, a treasury reborn. Perhaps the tower's greatest transformation came with the protection and presentation of the crown jewels. Once symbols of absolute power, these treasures became symbols of heritage and continuity. Displayed within the jewel house, the collection